תהלך בארץ, בתרמיל ובמקל, וודאי תפגוש בדרך שוב את ארץ ישראל, יחבקו אותך דרכיה.
Good morning, good afternoon, depending on your time zone. I'm Aryeh Green, and I'm here with you on Radio Melitz, melitz.radio.org, and very grateful for the opportunity and for the invitation from Rav Uri Ayalon and Ami Infeld from Melitz to join in this wonderful initiative that they've had going now for a number of years, bringing interesting content, educational, informational about Judaism, about Israel, values and the people, the culture, and the traditions of Israel and Judaism around the world. And now that we're in the midst of our coronavirus, COVID-19 virus challenges, I really appreciate their asking me to come and speak about a number of related issues, which perhaps for those who are stuck at home, or even then afterwards, people who can't necessarily enjoy the land of Israel as I've been privileged to, can enjoy and can appreciate and vicariously walk with me through the land of Israel as we discussed all sorts of issues related to both Israel, our history, the geography, the people of Israel, and the issues that I discuss in my book, My Israel Trail. When I hiked the Israel Trail, this is the only plug I'll make for the book. My Israel Trail was written about my hike on the Israel National Trail, 1,000 kilometers from the south of Israel, the tip of Israel in Eilat, through the Negev Desert, the Jerusalem Hills, and up to the north and the border with Lebanon along the coast from Caesarea down to Tel Aviv, and then inland across the length and the breadth of Israel, which I did about 6 years ago in 2014 as I was beginning the process, or in the middle of the process, of healing from what was a devastating divorce. And my book is about that hike. It's about the trip itself and my experiences in all sorts of different circumstances, hiking the land of Israel for 2 months, 1,000 kilometers, all by myself, with a 50-pound pack, 25-kilo pack on my back at age 51. That's really not the usual age for hikers of the Israel Trail. You may have heard of the Israel Trail, but usually it's post-army, pre-college students who do the trail, and often in small groups. You can also do it pieces at a time, and there are groups actually that do organized parts of the trek a day or two at a time. But I did it at age 51, as I said, just after the finalization of my divorce, a divorce that I hadn't looked for, and therefore for me it was very much kind of not just exploring the land and the history, it was really getting out of myself and trying to find a way to literally move on with my life. And so my book is as much about meeting our personal challenges and the lessons that I learned, the lessons that I learned on the physical hike, which I'll describe a little bit in this introduction, as it is about the hike itself. So we're just beginning here, and I decided to start, this is a radio program of course, but we'll also have video and images, and I'm recording it on video for those who are interested. And I'm standing in my garden here in Beit Shemesh, in the center of Israel, and you may be able to hear in the background not just the birds, but occasional neighborly noises, and that's okay. The whole purpose that Rav Uri and Ami and I discussed in setting up this series of programs about hiking the Israel Trail and meeting personal challenges is to do so very informally, which is why I'm standing in my garden. I'm recording this very amateurly on a home camera, in fact an iPhone. I wanted, though, to do it not like all of these other Zoom video conferences and webinars and what have you. They're, people sitting at their desks, which is fine, or in their living rooms, which I have done, but actually outdoors. And the intention with this series over the next 10 weeks is to explore different parts of the land of Israel and the different lessons that I learned on the trail, and hopefully to do so as much outside as indoors. So with the restrictions that we have today of remaining within 100 meters of our house, I can actually go behind my house into a little field, but that was a little bit cumbersome for this first introductory segment. So we decided just to do it in my garden to share with you a little bit of the sounds of the outdoors. And with the restrictions that we have today, there's much less traffic noise that you can sometimes hear from the highway behind the fields behind me. So welcome to my garden. You can see in the background my home vineyard, which is the beginnings of it. Whoops, that's an interesting way of pointing on a camera. I have a vineyard with 21 vines in my garden, and I'm standing at the bottom of the garden, and I'm just going to move here into a little bit more shady area before the sun comes up. My swing chair behind me, and I hope that the sound quality and the video quality are sufficient up to Militz's standards. But let's get started with an exploration of my Israel trail. So the idea informally here is to set up a series of both reminiscence and explorations loosely based on the book, but not entirely. And as I said, we're looking to give the opportunity for those of you at home, whether you're restricted at home or perhaps just watching at home because you would love to see more of the land of Israel and follow along in my footsteps, as it were, with the journey that I made on the land of through the land of Israel. Now, because this is a radio program, I'm going to describe a number of different visual elements, but on the video, we're hoping to be able to post both photos and a few videos to accompany the radio program. So bear with me if I describe what those of you who are watching actually can see. And for instance, I was mentioning my vineyard and my garden. Basically, we're surrounded by some lovely spring greenery, and you may have seen the first leaves as the vineyard begins to develop now in spring. And you can of course hear the birds in the background. My Israel Trail is the title that I chose is indicative of the way that I've viewed both my personal journey, having moved to Israel 35 years ago, as well as my actual hike on the Israel Trail. And it's also a little bit of a hint that we all have our own Israel Trail, that whatever our relationship with Israel is, whether we live here, whether we visited, whether we pray for the well-being of Israel, whether we just occasionally think about Israel or read about it in the news, we all have our own trail, as it were, that's connected to Israel. And therefore, these radio programs, the talks that I'd like to share with you, are going to relate, of course, to my journey, to my experiences, but I hope that they'll have enough universal applicability that you can enjoy them also, and hopefully perhaps share with me some of the learnings that I was privileged to come upon. So this initial introduction is meant to be not just informal, but to give a little bit of a framing, a reference point for the rest of the series. So I'm going to go very quickly and briefly over kind of the entire experience and mention casually the lessons that I learned in the experience, although not going to go into any great detail because we're keeping this to a half an hour as an introductory program. So again, I hiked. My name is Aryeh Green. I don't even think that I mentioned that at the beginning. I moved to Israel in 1984. I came here to study to be a Reform rabbi, having grown up in an American Reform Jewish family. A family with a very strong Jewish identity, but a very strong American identity as well. I'm actually a direct descendant of one of the first Jewish families to have come to the shores of North America. My ancestors came in 1690 to Montreal, and in 1720 to New Amsterdam, as New York was called then. And my great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandfather was known as the Patriot Rabbi, Gershom Mendeseus, the rabbi and leader of the Jewish community in New York at the time, the head of the Spanish and Portuguese Jewish synagogue, Shereth Israel, who, in fact, when the British were encroaching on New York, refused to live under British occupation, preached a fervently pro-revolution sermon, and led his congregation with the Sifrei Torah, with the scrolls of the Torah, out of New York into Connecticut. He ended up back down in Philadelphia, where he helped to start the Mikveh Israel Synagogue, another very early Jewish community in pre-United States America. In fact, he was in the end rewarded, if you want to use that term, or at least acknowledged for his support, when he was one of the 13 clergymen who inaugurated President George Washington in 1782. So you can imagine growing up with that background, very strong American identity, almost kind of daughters, sons of the American Revolution, but from a Jewish standpoint, and a very strong Jewish identity because precisely of the freedoms and the liberties and the privileges that were afforded to the Jewish people here or there in America. And growing up with that kind of an identity, I didn't really have Israel very much on my radar. But when I came to Israel to study to be a Reform rabbi, I discovered a number of different elements of my own identity, of our history, which I hadn't otherwise really focused on or even perhaps been aware of. And I decided at that point I became more observant. So I was no longer intending to be a Reform rabbi. And having become more observant, I also decided to throw my lot in with the Jewish people in our return to our ancestral homeland here in Israel, and became a fervent Zionist, in love with the concepts of Zionism, of the return of this ancient people to our ancestral homeland as the indigenous people here. That's not a political statement. We can talk later perhaps in one of the other segments about political issues, which none of which denigrate or dismiss the claims of any others who are residents in this area. But it's a factual understanding of what the meaning of Jewish civilization is, the meaning of the people of Israel. And Israel is the nation state of the Jewish people, that we are the indigenous people here, the Jews being indigenous to Judea, Judea, the people of Israel to the land of Israel, and therefore justifying and giving legitimacy to the reestablishment of our sovereignty in the modern nation state of Israel. But that kind of, my intention here is not to go on a polemic, but to connect the dots between my own identity and connection to the land of Israel, the people of Israel, our history, and of course our modern nation state, with eventually my decision to hike the Israel Trail. So having moved to Israel in 1984, I dropped out of the Reform Rabbinical program, and yet throwing my lot, as I said, in with this wonderful experience of the return of our people of Israel to the land of Israel, decided to remain here. And I was married for 28 years to a wonderful British woman who we had met in my journey on the way here. And we raised a wonderful family, Bayit Ne'eman B'Yisrael, as it's called in Hebrew, a faith-based home here in Israel, although also as part of the people of Israel and the traditions of Israel, with three wonderful children, and created a wonderful, beautiful, faith-based and value-based life here in Israel. At one point, my wife decided that she no longer wanted to be married. And as I write in the book, and as she has agreed and acknowledged, it was not necessarily anything that either could be pinpointed as a specific issue between us. I mean, there are marriages that fall apart and have specific areas of conflict or incompatibilities, but it kind of doesn't really matter. As I write about extensively in the book, our relationship was a very strong and beautiful relationship. And at the point where she decided, which was of course her right as a mature adult, making her own decisions, that she no longer wanted to be married, I tried to be, as I struggled with the whole issue of a divorce that I hadn't looked for, that I wasn't interested in, because of my love for her, I struggled with making even the divorce itself work as successfully and as amicably as possible. And we did, thank God. But it was a very, very difficult, challenging period for me. And when we actually carried out the divorce in the end, in December of 2013, I had already made the decision that I was going to, let's just say, do something radical. I was going to hike the Israel Trail, something that I'd wanted to do for a number of years, the background in hiking in California and also here in Israel with the children. Every year with 3 children in the Israeli school system, you may be familiar, that Israeli school kids go off on an annual tour at least once a year, if not more. And I was one of those fathers who always accompanied each of my kids and their classmates. I was kind of the dream accompanier for most of their schools because I play the guitar, I like hiking. I actually carry a weapon, which is something that's a requirement here in Israel, that there's a Milavei Neshek, a guard for every school trip. I also happen to be a medic in the IDF, and there's a requirement that there's a medic accompanying at every school trip. So I was kind of like the perfect accompaniment for those school trips. And so every year for 20 years, I accompanied my kids on their school trips, and our family did a lot of hiking also. But in California growing up, as well as here in Israel, my hikes were day hikes. Maybe an overnight here or there. A backpacking trip in California, yes, when I was a teenager in summer camp, did a 2-night overnight backpack, but never something as extensive as this. And therefore, for me, after the divorce, the idea of getting out there and literally leaving everything behind, my family, my work, my kids, my house, and being out on my own was something that for me was a wonderfully welcoming diversion, if you will, a chance to be on my own, to kind of reevaluate to a certain extent what is important in my life. As you can imagine, in the 3 years that it took from initial discussions to the actually carrying out of the divorce, there was a lot of talk. Talk with therapists, talk with friends, talk between me and my former wife, and my children, my family. And thank God, and I'm so grateful for all of those who listened, who talked with me, who shared with me their own wisdom, especially those who weren't paid for the privilege, within the context of therapy and friends and family. But by the time the divorce came through, I was ready for some quiet, and I was ready for some alone time. And so from that perspective, for me, getting out on the Israel Trail, which, as I say, is something that I had wanted to do for many years. I had friends who had hiked portions of the Israel Trail. I had children of friends who had hiked the whole Israel Trail. I had friends of my children who also had hiked, and I had accompanied them a day here or there, some of our closer friends. And it's something that I always had kind of wistfully in the back of my mind. One day I'm going to hike the Israel Trail. And in the end, on February 16th, Sunday, 2014, I found myself with this 50-pound pack on my back, leaving Eilat, going up Wadi Shlomo, the Solomon's Creek, dry riverbed, heading up the first day, the first stage of the Israel Trail. And what can I say? 8 weeks later, 2 months later, I hiked for 48 days, 6 days a week. I didn't hike on Shabbat. Basically on my own. There were 2 days in the course of the trip that I actually hiked with another individual in the entire day. But other than that, I hiked on my own. And in fact, when I was writing the book and I went through my journal entries, I was really surprised to see that there were 12 days out of the total 48 where I literally did not see a single soul from morning to night. And even on the days where I did, I would pass somebody, or more likely they would pass me because they were the younger crowd, of course, most of the hikers on the trail. And of course, you'd meet people coming towards you. And you might have some small interaction with these fellow hikers, but I was still on my own for virtually all the time, and of course also sleeping at night. I slept about 2/3 of the time out in the fields, out in the desert or in the forests in the Galil. And in a later segment, I'll describe in detail a wonderful phenomenon here in Israel called trail angels, people who open their homes and will put a hiker on the Israel Trail up for the night, do their laundry, give them a shower, sometimes food. But I'll get to that a little bit more in detail. Most of the time I slept out on my own in my tent. And it was, as I began to say, a phenomenally transformative experience. And what I'd like to share with you over the next 10 sessions, as I said, roughly following the storyline of the book, which is the storyline of the hike, is a combination of the experiences themselves, some of which were funny, some of which were scary, some of which were really eye-opening, and also the lessons that I learned along the way. And those lessons helped me tremendously to recover and to heal from the devastating pain and anger and resentment and frustration and sadness of my divorce. Now I will introduce them now in the 10 minutes that remain for us today, but that's kind of like touching on the highlights. What I'd like to do is to start with a little bit of an anecdote that I think puts kind of everything that I want to share with you in perspective. Imagine that I am literally on the side of a cliff. I'm on a path that's about this wide, which for listeners is about, say, 10 inches, 12 inches wide. And I don't need to exaggerate. It wasn't, it was narrow enough to be somewhat frightening. I think I mentioned that I had a 50-pound, 25-kilo pack on my back, and I'm on this very, very narrow side of a cliff on a very narrow ledge. And I'm walking along, gingerly, mind you, and all of a sudden the path ends. It just stops. And I don't know what to do. And I actually begin to panic, which is somewhat unusual for me, but I couldn't turn around. If I turn one way, the pack is going to pull me off down into the abyss. There's about 40 feet, about, what is that, 5 meters, 6 meters down into the rocks below. And so if I turn that way, the pack is going to pull me off balance down, and I'm going to fall into a crevice and, I don't know, break something, and nobody will find me for 3 weeks. If I turn this way, if I turn the other way, my pack's going to hit against the side of this cliff, and also I'm going to lose my balance, and I froze. Well, I took 3 deep breaths. Thank you to Thomas Crum, whose book 3 Deep Breaths I had read prior to hiking the trail. Wonderful book that I'm happy to recommend. It's a short read, and it's all about taking the breaths that enable you to focus, to center yourself, to take stock of your situation, and to think about the possibilities that are ahead of you. And I basically slowly lowered my pack to the ground and gingerly made my way back along the side of the cliff on this trail to where I found, about 30 meters back, the trail sign, which I'll share with you in a later segment, how you read them, how it looks, and it indicated you had to go up the side of the cliff. And going up the side of the cliff meant there were handholds, metal handholds there, which I simply had missed because I was gingerly walking along and focused on not falling off the side of the cliff. So having then discovered where the path led, I went back to where I had left my pack, and I then gingerly put it on again. And what was fascinating to me at the time, which I recognized immediately, was the pack felt somehow lighter, which made no sense. Nobody had taken anything out of the pack. But what I realized immediately was nothing had changed about the pack. Something had changed in me. Something had changed in the way I was approaching this particular challenge. And I felt lighter. I felt, well, I knew where the path was. So I knew where to go. So I had a sense of direction. I had a sense of confidence. And I made my way back and then climbed up the side of the cliff and kept going. And what I realized later, which I wrote in my journal that night, is that sometimes we have to put down our baggage. Sometimes we have to kind of stop, take those breaths, rethink, retrace our steps, figure out where is the path that we have to go. And sometimes we can only do that by putting aside our baggage. Obviously, I'm referring to emotional baggage, not just the physical pack, but that's the point about so many or all of the lessons that I learned while hiking the Israel Trail. I learned lessons that were applicable to the physical trek itself, but which were applicable not only to the challenges of the hike, of reaching the goal that I had set for that first day or finishing the trail itself. The lessons that I learned were applicable to what I was trying to do in terms of the personal growth that I was trying to achieve, and to achieve the sense of healing that I was looking for after my divorce. And that was one of the lessons that just kind of, I think, puts into context. It's a terrific, if you will, metaphor for so many challenges that we face in our life. Sometimes we have to put down our baggage and reevaluate. And so that's basically what my book is about, and what the other lessons that I learned in the book are about. I learned lessons in humility, in understanding our place in the universe while walking through the silent desert, hour after hour, day after day, in fact, week after week, for 3 weeks in the desert. I learned a sense of acceptance, the importance to understand that this is our reality and this is what we have to face, and we need to have that acceptance to be able to take steps to move on. I discovered a renewed sense of gratitude, of appreciation for all the blessings in my life. I learned probably the most important lesson for me in my experience was a sense of forgiveness. Forgiveness of God for putting me in this position. Forgiveness of my wife for the decisions that she took, however much she had the right to take those decisions. Forgiveness of myself for mistakes that I had made, whether it was on the trail and missing the trail signs, or of course in the wider context of my own life's decisions. And I learned a sense or rediscovered a sense of purpose, a sense of goals and objectives which give meaning to my life and can give meaning to all our lives, as Viktor Frankl wrote so persuasively in his book, Man's Search for Meaning, that we need goals. We need a sense of purpose in order to give meaning to our life. And those are the 5 elements, or the 5 lessons that I learned that I describe more in detail in the book. Then I'll be happy to explore with you in this radio program, video program over the next 10 segments or so, going a lot more into detail in the experiences and the people that I met and the places that I saw in the desert, in the hills of Jerusalem, along the coast, in the north, along the border with Lebanon. They all come together and came together for me to enable me not only to move on with my life beyond my divorce, but they reinvigorated all of these elements. In fact, I do mention in the beginning of the book, Rav Moshe Chaim Luzzatto, and it's very important to share with you as we conclude these last few minutes together. Rav Moshe Chaim Luzzatto in his book Mesilat Yesharim, the Ramchal in his book The Path of the Just says, nothing that I'm going to say here is necessarily new or innovative, but sometimes it's important. And I think, in my great modesty, I don't think that he's right. I think he did provide some innovative interpretations of many aspects of our tradition, but his point was sometimes we have to repeat, we have to rediscover, we have to explore again, even some of the things, the truths that we know, in order to reinforce them in ourselves. And for me, the lessons that I learned on the hike, on my trek on the Israel Trail, were very much about that. I'd always been grateful for the blessings in my life, but now I had a renewed sense of appreciation for all of the wonderful family, friends, and the privilege that I had to hike the Israel Trail, and the privilege that I have to live in the land of Israel after 2,000 years of dispersion, something our ancestors dreamed of, prayed for, longed for, and weren't able to experience. And that's true for all of the different lessons that I learned, which is why I'm hoping that this series of talks and videos will help to reinvigorate, to reawaken a sense of Zionism in all of us, a sense of appreciation and gratitude for the blessings that we have to be living in the time we're living, whether we're here in Israel or whether we visit occasionally or just think about it or pray for Israel, whether we're Jewish or Christian or Muslim or atheist or what have you, reawakening our sense of Zionism and reasserting the legitimacy of Israel and Zionism. It also kind of permeates my appreciation for the experience I had on the Israel Trail, in addition to the personal lessons that I learned that helped me, and I hope, and I've heard from others, that it has been helpful to others to face their own personal challenges. So thank you for being with us, and I look forward to sharing more of the experience again with you in the future. Thanks again for watching and for listening. All the best.
להתהלך בארץ בתרמיל ובמקל, וודאי תפגוש בדרך שוב את ארץ ישראל. יחבקו אותך דרכיה של הארץ הטובה,